I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Good morning and welcome back to AM Prime on WESN. So today we're having a conversation about, well, World Literacy Day, observed on September 8th, reminded us that the ability to read and learn is deeply connected to many factors. Some of these factors include, including one that often goes unnoticed, which is good vision. Research shows that 1 in 4 children has an undetected vision problem, and since 80% of classroom learning is visual, eyesight plays a critical role in literacy and academic success. Today we continue that conversation with Kareem Kazmali, an optometrist at TEH Optical, to discuss how early eye care can support children's reading, learning, and overall development. Good morning, Mr. Kazmali.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Naomi.
Of course. So, World Literacy Day has passed, but just tell us why do you think that this conversation is something that we should continue to have even after the acknowledgement of this day and moving forward?
So I think it's a conversation that we should be having year-round, because approximately 80% of learning is visual. 80% of a child's school life is visual. So sometimes we have children who we think are slow or who are delinquent, and they're not good at reading, they're not good at writing, they don't understand what we're teaching in school. And really and truly, it's a simple thing, like something is wrong with their vision. Mm-hmm. And we take it for granted, because children, they think that they see perfect. They don't know what they should be seeing like. And that's why early intervention is very important. So
explain that for us. I mean, how can undetected vision problems affect children, and this not just in the classroom but in their everyday life?
Yeah, so in their everyday life as well, children with sports, with homework, with coordination as well, we need to be able to see properly. We need light to focus on the back of the eyes sharply in order for us to see. And if a child has what we call a refractive error, whether they be long-sighted, short-sighted, or have something called astigmatism, light isn't going to be focused on the eyes properly, which could also cause or also affect the eyes to not be developed properly, therefore affecting vision long term.
Mm-hmm. So how can a child struggle with reading, sometimes actually be linked to their vision problems rather than a learning disability? Because I think some parents may not, they might think it's a learning disability when in reality it's just poor eyesight, right?
Yes, correct. So, I mean, in order for us to read, we need to see. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that we should always investigate if a child has issues reading would be their eyesight. And oftentimes we think, a child might have an actual disability or they don't care, but really and truly it's just the eyesight that is causing an issue. Just last week, I had a 23-year-old who came in for her first eye exam. So in 23 years of living, she never had an eye exam, and she drives, and she couldn't even see the second line on the chart, which is a significant reduction in vision. And thankfully, we were able, with glasses, to help her see very close to perfect vision.
Right.
So, it is very important sometimes that we do an eye exam because it can affect the development of the eyes. So thankfully for this 23-year-old, she could have still seen very close to perfect. There are some cases where we have children, they go so long uncorrected or undercorrected that it permanently affects the development of someone's eyes.
At what age should parents begin scheduling eye exams for their child, and how often should that happen, or should it be checked?
Yeah. So with an optometrist, I would say once the child can speak and they can communicate with someone, you should bring them in for an eye exam with the optometrist. But it goes a little bit more in depth as well. You want to take them as early as 6 months to their pediatrician when they go for their monthly checkups and their vaccines and stuff. The pediatrician, it starts with them. They should look at the health of the eyes. They should be able to look at the back of the eyes and make sure there's no underlying issues. Make sure the eyes are aligned well. Make sure they don't have any cross eyes or what we say in our Trini terms, cokey eye. You want to make sure that those things are not present in the child, because if they are there, you want to seek professional intervention from an optometrist, from an ophthalmologist, right? And then, but from the time the child can communicate, you want to take them for just a routine check with the optometrist, who will assess, quantify the vision, and they can determine if that child needs specialized care from an ophthalmologist. They can also determine if that child needs to get corrective lenses, whether it be glasses, whether it be contact lenses. And we can also determine if that child needs some form of visual therapy or vision therapy to help the eyes focus well and work well together.
Right. What would you say to persons who do not necessarily believe in glasses or corrective lenses? Because I know there are some people who say, wearing glasses would only make your eyesight worse. It's not going to fix the problem. It just kind of gives you it gives you a temporary fix, because once you take off the glasses, your eyesight is still bad, right? So there are a few misconceptions about wearing corrective lenses. Can you answer to those?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an optometrist. I've been in the field since 2013, and it's only recently that I convinced my mom that glasses doesn't make your vision worse, right? Because people have the conception that when you start to wear glasses, you have to always wear it, or they think that because you always have to wear it, the glasses make things worse. But really and truly, we may have a progressive condition. So in my case, I started to wear glasses at age 13. And my prescription was like around -1. So I was mildly short-sighted. But short-sightedness is a very progressive condition. As I grow, my eyes will also grow. So the short-sightedness will obviously increase because my eyes are growing. So in my 30s now, my prescription would have stopped changing at -4. Now, research tells us that if I didn't get glasses when I was 13 years, that -4 may be way higher than that, maybe going to -10 or more, but also not just increasing my glasses prescription, it could also cause my eyes to become underdeveloped. So my best corrected vision wouldn't be what we call 20/20 or perfect vision. It would actually be, or could have been, a little bit more reduced than 20/20. So that's why with glasses, you put on the glasses, you see well, you take them off, you don't see. But not wearing the glasses, or wearing an undercorrected glasses, so wearing the wrong prescription for too long as well, can cause the eyesight to actually get worse, and therefore causing detriment to the child, because they're not seeing well. They may not know how to complain, or they may be afraid to complain to mommy, daddy, to the teacher, because they may think that You know, if I complain, I might get buff, or my parents might say, well, I just don't want to learn my schoolwork, and they're afraid to complain. And that's why we as parents, we as teachers, we as the elders in society, we have to, look out for the children because they are the future.
Yeah.
And if we don't help their eyesight, then we can affect their learning, we can affect their independence.
Yes. Besides the corrective lenses, are there any other, or what other supports or preventative steps can parents take, or steps that are available to parents?
Yeah, so with children, you definitely want to decrease near work. A lot of parents will come and they will say to the ophthalmologist, to the optometrist, tell them the phone is too bad for them, or tell them the tablet is bad for them. But what I like to tell the parents, yes, the phone, excessive phone time, excessive tablet time, excessive screen time in general is bad, but excessive near work is a problem, right? Focusing near, having children focus all the way up here, all the time, looking at a phone, looking at a book, can cause issues. It can induce short-sightedness or myopia, which is where the eyeball is longer than normal. So we want to be able to reduce that. So you want to decrease near time. You want to increase the working distance. So increasing the distance, the object or the target is from the child's face. Even us as adults, we want to increase the distance, the object is from our face. So what I like to tell parents is when you're sitting upright and your feet are flat on the floor, where your kneecap starts, around that distance is where we should hold our phone, where we should hold our tablet, where we should hold our books, especially for children. Because when we hold targets very close to the eyes, it focuses in the back of the eyes in such a way that it causes the eyeball to actually grow longer. Right? Researchers predict that by the year 2050, 50% of the world will become short-sighted. And that's because of phones, because the world is in our hands. Life is up close. We have it in front of us, right? So we're trying very hard around the world to reduce short-sightedness. We do a lot of research into something called myopia control, right? Where a simple thing, increasing the working distance, increasing the amount of outdoor time, at least 2 hours outdoors with correction. So meaning if that child has a refractive error, if they need to wear glasses or contact lens, they must wear that when they go outside and they're playing, whether it be football, whether it be just playing with the dog, playing with the cat, playing with the goat, with the horse, whether it be riding a bicycle, outdoor work, at least 2 hours of outdoor work every day in the daylight, not in the nighttime, more in the daylight. We need that sunlight, we need that light to focus on the back of the eyes properly to help with the growth and the development of the eyes. So that's increasing the working distance is one thing that parents can encourage their children to do, increasing outdoor work, and also taking frequent breaks when doing near work. So researchers tell us 20-20-20. There's a lot of research going into it where they are increasing the timing and so on in this. But 20-20-20 basically means every 20 minutes or so, you look away at something at least 20 feet away from you for at least 20 seconds. So, I mean, we don't have to stick to 20-20-20, but at least we use it as a guideline, every 20 minutes, every half hour or so, we look away at something that's at least 20 feet away or more for at least as little as 20 seconds, but try to make it a little bit longer, maybe a 2 minutes or so. You don't have to get up and take a break and walk around and procrastinate. You just sit up from your computer screen and you look away at something in the distance.
Yeah. What initiatives does TEH Optical have, if any, to make eye care more accessible to families across Trinidad and Tobago?
So TEH Optical for World Literacy Day, so from the 9th of September until the 20th of September at our Brentwood Mall branch, we're doing free eye screening and free eye exams to everyone, not just children, but everyone. So you can come to the Brentwood Mall. We open from 10 o'clock to 6 o'clock, except on Mondays. We don't open on Mondays, well, Sundays and Mondays, but we open Tuesdays to Saturdays from 10 o'clock to 6 o'clock, where we will be doing free eye exams until the 20th of September. We also, at TEH, at Trinidad Eye Hospital, we also have a screening team that goes around the country Even Tobago, they go around the country and they do screening, and we try to pinpoint people with diabetic issues, we try to pinpoint people with refractive issues, with hypertensive issues, with glaucoma and so on. And we try to encourage them to come in. Once we find a problem, encourage them to come in for a detailed eye exam.
Right. Finally, what is your message to, or your main message to parents, teachers, communities about protecting children's vision as a foundation of literacy?
Yeah, so pay attention to children, not just your children, pay attention to children in general, right? You want to make sure you want to observe them, see how they're grabbing their toys, see how they're reading, see how they're looking at the television, see how they're playing sports. You know, you might see a child playing football and they're running up to kick the ball, but they miss the ball when they're kicking. Or they're playing cricket and they swing and they miss the ball when they're playing cricket, and or they're not seeing the ball and we think they're not good at the sport. But really and truly, it might actually be an eye issue. They're going close to the television, they're squinting their eyes, they're complaining of headaches, they're tilting the head when they're looking at the board, they're covering an eye when they're looking at the board. All these things are telling us that there's something wrong with the eyes. There's something wrong with how the eyes work together, or something wrong with both eyes, right? And we need to observe. We as adults need to be our children's keeper. We need to take care of them. We need to look after them. We need to look at them, pinpoint any issues. And if we see that issues, you know, we tell the parents, or we make we tell the grandparents, or so on. And we make an appointment for them. We take them in to an optical, to an optometrist, to an ophthalmologist, where we can look at the eyes, assess the eyes, and determine if there's any issues, and get them the help that they need as soon as possible. Because like I said before, the longer a child goes uncorrected for a refractive error, the more it affects the development of the eye. The longer that child go undercorrected as well, the more it can affect the development of the eyes. So for children, some children, depending on their eyesight, on their prescription, we tend to recommend as little as 3-month eye exams, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 1-year eye exams. It all depends on the child. So my advice to all parents, all guardians, all caretakers out there is pay attention to the children, right? Get them the help they need as soon as possible, and listen to the advice of the eye care professionals, and try your best to, you know, take heed of the advice and get them that help that they need as soon as possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Kareem, for, you know, creating that, helping us understand that connection between good vision and literacy, and I think not just in kids, but in everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And we're available. You can give us a call. You can check us on social media. You can come in store and have a chat with the optometrist. And we are more than happy to answer your questions. We're more than happy to do eye exams for you and get you that help that you need when it comes to your eyesight, especially for the children.
Yeah. So y'all can check out Trinidad Eye Hospital at the Brantford Mall location. It's free eye exams it started September 8th till the 20th.
Yeah, correct. And you can check us out on all social media platforms, TEH, Trinidad Eye Hospital, and TEH Optical. We have TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, where you can get our contact numbers and contact us for an appointment to do your eye exam.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for this conversation. And I hope this is something that we can continue to have and continue to bring awareness to. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we have another conversation lined up for you. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
Every time someone steps into your elevator, they trust it will carry them safely. That's why preventative maintenance matters. It protects lives and shields you from liability. It prevents sudden breakdowns that disrupt business and drain budgets. And it keeps you compliant, so you never have to second-guess safety. With Ardent Solutions, you're not just maintaining elevators, you're protecting people, preserving trust, and keeping your building moving forward.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Remember waking up early just to catch your favorite cartoons? WESN brings back those magical mornings with Retro Saturdays.
Thus, the Powerpuff Girls were born!
Where the young at heart relive the fun. Join us every Saturday from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, only on WESN, the content capital.
Welcome back to AM Prime this morning. So we turn our attention to the debate over the future of the TT dollar. We've previously heard from Professor Patrick Watson, who has opposing views on the devaluation of the TT dollar. So this morning, economist Dr. Justin Ram has been vocal about the need for depreciation, saying the exchange rate should be a price signal that encourages us to produce more, rely less on imports, and rebuild a production-driven economy. Today, we'll hear his perspective on what such a shift could mean for Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to the program, Dr. Ram.
Hello, good morning, and thank you very much for having me on your program this morning. I'm very pleased to be here to discuss what I think is a very important topic.
Yes.
And for Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes. So you've argued that the TT dollar is overvalued. Can you explain why you believe depreciation is necessary at this time?
Well, first of all, I'd say to your audience that if you think about it, we've had the TT dollar at a fixed rate for maybe well over a decade. It hasn't moved substantially. And I would ask your audience whether they think that the Trinidad and Tobago economy has moved in the right direction since that time. Now, I would also ask your audience members if to hark back to those who might have been around in the 1970s, 1980s, when Trinidad and Tobago was actually producing quite a lot of things. I remember back then when I was a boy that Trinidad and Tobago at one point produced refrigerators, freezers, even televisions, as well as brake pads for the vehicles. We also repaired jet engines at Piarco. But we decided to go in a path that said to us, let us rather consume what we can cheaply from abroad. Now, what that has meant is that we have transformed the Trinidad and Tobago economy over the course of 40 years from what I think was a very viable production economy. And of course, it was a young production economy, and so we still needed to protect it. But we decided to go in the opposite direction to buy consumables from abroad rather than consume what we produce locally and then sell our excess for export earnings to allow us to consume what we couldn't reasonably expect to produce ourselves. I think that particular transformation has happened over the last 40 years, and more so over the last 10 to 20 years of our economic cycle, where if you look at it now, the consumption basket of the average Trinidadian has about 70% of imports in it and only 30% of what is produced domestically. That is unsustainable for a number of reasons. Because one, it means that where are our people getting the types of jobs that can give them dignity, yes, and give them the hope of being able to support their families. When you do not produce for yourself, you have a situation where many people cannot find good jobs. And what then happens is that to support this consumption of households, the government must then spend heavily on transfers and subsidies, which then leads to high deficits and public debt. For me, it is clear that we need to transform this economy once again back into a production economy. And I think that the FX rate, the exchange rate, is the most important price signal within an economy like this. And so my vision, and I think that this should be the vision of all Trinidad and Tobagonians, is to provide an economy that gives people dignity, and that can only come about if we are producing more of what we consume. And by doing so, it means that people can get good jobs to be able to support their families on their own without the need for significant transfers and subsidies from the government. And it just leads to this cycle. I think we need to break out of the cycle. We're not going to get out of this by simply going down the same economic trajectory that we have done for the last 10, 20, in fact, 40 years. A significant change is required.
Right. So before we continue with looking at how we can use local production and I guess and some sort of diversification, because I also think that would be needed. What about the concept that the devaluation of the dollar could spiral out of control if it happens? I mean, there was the argument that look at what happened to Jamaica. Why do you think that would be different here?
Well, it doesn't need to spiral out of control. So what I'm advocating for is, of course, to manage this devaluation in a way that ensures that what we produce domestically is always going to be competitive against what you can import into this country. And not only that, to ensure that what we produce domestically can, of course, compete in external markets. So I think we have to start looking at the foreign exchange rate, not only in terms of consumption of imports, and of course, the price of imports are going to increase. And in fact, that is what we want, because we want more people to start consuming more of what we produce domestically. But that also means that now we are in a position to export to external markets and to sell more, thereby earning the amount of FX rate that we foreign currency that we need to purchase the things that we cannot produce ourselves. So it's starting to look at this from a different perspective. Yes, of course, in the short term, there's going to be some increase in prices, particularly of what we import. But what is going to happen is that we're then going to have the substitution effect, where more people start to produce more things locally. And when you start to consume more things locally, it means that your locally produced goods start to become better, because now you have an actual market. You can survey your customers to see where you can improve. Your domestic producers can do that, and thereby continuously improving their products. There is no country in the world now that is a major producer that has allowed their domestic market to be overrun by imports. If you look at major economies that are producers now, Korea, for example, think about, for example, when you first bought a Kia vehicle, it couldn't really stand up to the American vehicles. But over time, because of the improvements, so because of people buying it over time, Kia vehicles are considered very good vehicles now. And that is what we have to consider for our own locally produced goods and services.
Right. When we spoke to Professor Watson, he would have stated, and his argument was that nobody wants our goods, right? And, meaning devaluation won't automatically boost exports. How would you respond to that criticism?
I would respond in the same way that I've just said. The Koreans, they could have taken that defeatist approach many years ago when they started to produce Samsung electronics, when they started to produce Hyundai vehicles, Kia vehicles. I do recall when first seeing those Korean vehicles here, nobody really wanted them compared to a Nissan or Toyota. But over time, things improve because you have to stick with it. Of course, it's going to take a bit of a journey to get there, but you have to have a vision for your people and a vision for your economy as to where you want to go. Where do you want to be in a generation time?
Yeah.
It cannot be based on short-termism and short-term policies. It has to have a vision of where do we want our country to be. And I think if I say to Dr. Watson, look at those Kia vehicles when they first came on the market, nobody wanted them. Now everybody will drive a Kia vehicle or a Hyundai vehicle because they are considered top of the line.
Yeah, I mean, based on what you just said, you have to have the vision and look at the long-term benefits of it. But I mean, your average citizen may only hear, prices will go up. When we think about our dollar weakening, naturally prices will go up. How do you explain the long-term benefits of depreciation to the average citizen?
So let me say that the depreciation on its own will not achieve the vision that we want. So it is one of the important factors and price signals that we need to use to move us in that direction. I would also say to our people, this is part of a comprehensive reform program, which also includes the necessity to educate everyone in the society to have a good level of education. Because what I would say to them right now is that because we produce so little and therefore produce so few meaningful jobs, there's very little incentive for us to educate everyone to high quality. I would say maybe only 20% of our secondary students get a good quality education. If we start re-evaluating and transforming this economy, immediately you have the incentive to increase the education outcomes for everyone so that it is on par with the top 20% in this country. Now, it is important that this is seen as an overall comprehensive reform program. And that is where the implementation of this requires skill and it requires dedicated communication by the government who might be in power now. Well, that of course is now the UNC government, and that means that the Prime Minister has to be on board in communicating where she sees the vision of this the vision for this economy going and how to take people along with it. It is a sense of saying we need to have some short-term. You have to tighten your belt initially to see the gains, and the gains will come in a few years' time, and definitely the gains will come for your children and your grandchildren. That's what this is about. It's a long-term vision as to where we want our economy to go. We don't want to be here again in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time. We want to have a resilient economy that's providing good jobs for all, and of course, good education for all, good health for all. Because at the end of the day, if you're producing, you need to have good human capital. And that means that there is an incentive to educate everyone and to provide good health care for all. It's all part of a vision now, a different type of economy than what we currently have now, which is to say we really don't need to educate many people because we don't have the good jobs. And to support those people who don't have good jobs, we have to spend heavily on transfers and subsidies, which leads to high fiscal deficits and high debt levels. It's a negative feedback loop that we must be committed to changing. And I think that that's the type of economic transformation that we need. Not
Yes.
short-termism. We must have a long-term perspective on where we want to be as a country and to have the economy that supports that.
And then I think as well a big part, as we mentioned, with diversification, because in order to, let's say, boost our production, we have to diversify the things that we think we know, right? And one of the things that, when I was speaking to Professor Watson, his thing was diversification should be the real solution rather than depreciation, right? Or devaluation. But my question for you, do you see devaluation as a trigger for diversification in that, or does it require something more?
So like I said there, so devaluation is one of the more important tools in the toolbox to help us achieve what we need to do, which is to produce more of what we consume and to produce more by adding value to what we have now to export more of that. Now think about this. We have always complained about us being the exporters of raw materials and then importing back the products that come from those raw materials. We have done that in many cases with cocoa, we have done that with sugar, and unfortunately, we have done that with our natural gas. Because in the main, we have been exporting raw natural gas in the form of liquefied natural gas. That gas then goes to someone who buys it. They then take that gas and add value to it. And most of those products that they produce, we are then importing back.
Right.
I'm saying to our people, why not add the value at home here and give our people the opportunities to work in those industries where we're adding value to that gas and thereby give them good jobs here, rather than simply exporting this raw product and importing it back. So for me, this economy is not difficult to diversify. We have the ability to do that. And I think after living abroad for some time and now being back in Trinidad, it really shocked me to see where this economy has gone from when I was a boy growing up here, for us producing so many things and to being proud of that. And then to see where we are now, where we just become consumers of imports. And that is because we have followed a doctrine of comparative advantage, of globalization without the necessary guardrails to ensure that we maintain the human condition and the human dignity of our people. Yes? So also, ultimately, I really want to say that we have to measure the outcomes differently. The foreign exchange reserves, that's seen as the holy grail of our development. That for me has to change. We have to start focusing on the human condition and of course the human dignity that we have for our people. If we start focusing on those things, then how we transform and the type of economy that we need will automatically change because the current economy does not provide that. FX reserve signals to me that you prioritize imports over the dignity and human condition of our people.
Yeah. How long do you think we would take to attain something like this? Proper diversification and I think as well having specific or having targeted investments when we look at how we diversify the economy. How long do you think we would take to reach that point?
So in doing this type of structural shift, it's going to take, I would say, to fully embed it will take maybe about a generation. But that doesn't mean that you take a generation to see all of the benefits and outcomes. You can start seeing benefits within the first 2 to 3 years of doing this, even within the first year if you start doing it. So what the implementation that has to happen here is one where we target, first of all, the low-hanging fruit. What are the things that we can start producing here that we really don't need to be importing? And I think, first of all, that has to be looking at the agricultural sector and, of course, food processing. We need to start doing a lot more of that here and making it more expensive to import those competitors of things that we produce here. And I think the best way to do that is to start looking at making the business environment much more flexible and easier. And I would say that currently we have something called the Special Economic Zones in Trinidad and Tobago that was implemented only, I think, last year. But it's very difficult to become a special economic zone in Trinidad and Tobago. And I would say, why not make the entire economy like a special economic zone, making it easy to produce things here and more difficult to import? I think that's the way we have to do. Right now, it's very easy to import and very difficult to produce things here. That has to be flipped on its head, I think. And we will start to see the benefits of that in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. And then we have to continuously move in that direction until this is fully embedded. And I would say within a generation, we can start producing even the most sophisticated electric vehicles here. We can start producing, instead of selling our raw cocoa to Belgium and places like that, we can start producing the best types of chocolate here. So this is the type of vision that we need, and we need to keep our people on board with this, on this vision. And it cannot be a situation where, as one government change, we simply go back to where we were before. We have to stay the path, and it's going to be a little bit difficult initially, but I think for those people who might not see the benefits immediately, we can have targeted interventions rather than whole-scale transfers and subsidies as we have now. We can target our interventions to support those households that might find it difficult going in the first 2 years or so. And let's support them while we move in this direction to transform the economy. And I would say that the TT dollar is an important tool in the toolbox to help us move in that direction.
I mean, based on how our economy is now, in your opinion, what sectors do you think we should focus on first to begin this diversification process and moving our economy to a more production-based economy?
So I would say the first sectors that offer us great opportunity are certainly tourism linked with agriculture and agro-tourism as well. If you think about it, Trinidad and Tobago has a unique tourism product that we have not exploited fully. One, you come to Trinidad and Tobago, you have wonderful ecotourism here, but you also have wonderful creative industries where people want to come and enjoy our creativity. Think about our festivals. We have festivals throughout the year, starting with Carnival, Jose, Diwali, you name it. We have festivals that people can come to. And then after that, of course, I think that Tobago is a very important part of the economic future of Trinidad and Tobago, because then people can go to Tobago, you can get the lovely sun, sea, and sand there, but you also have great ecotourism as well. And of course, I would say that there's no better place to eat than in Trinidad and Tobago. Any of my friends who have visited me here in Trinidad and Tobago say, oh my gosh, wow, this cuisine is out of this world. There's so much opportunity. But if you think about it, then you can now link your agricultural production to providing the necessary supplies for that tourism industry. So you have immediately there the type of feedback loop that's going to be critical. And then, of course, you have the agro-processing that's going to be critical as well. So we need to start looking at it. Then after that, I think there are other areas where we can start thinking of adding value. Our manufacturing sector, we have wonderful entrepreneurs in this country where I think we need to start supporting them. And the manufacturers are the ones who are ultimately going to help move us in the right direction. And it's not only about producing low value-added goods. We can think about producing very high value-added goods. There is no restriction on us now producing electric vehicles in Trinidad and Tobago. It's probably the easiest type of vehicle that you can start building and manufacturing here, using, of course, components from from global supply chains, but you can start adding value to it here. So I'm just saying that initially, tourism linked to agriculture, agro-processing, and of course, agro-tourism is of course the main area that I think we should be focused on initially. There are a lot of opportunities there because of the natural advantages that we have in terms of the creativity of our people, the festivals, the cuisine, the eco-tourism that we have here in our country. And as a combination, Trinidad and Tobago provides a unique destination for anyone wanting to visit these shores.
Yeah.
So I think that that's the way we need to go initially.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that we can attain or reach this this point of boosting local production without necessarily having to devalue the TT dollar? I mean, just in that, because what I'm trying to understand, right? Based on what you're saying, is it that the devaluation of the dollar has to happen as a scare tactic per se, if that makes sense?
So it's not meant to be a scare tactic. It's meant to be part of an overall suite of comprehensive reforms, yes, because it signals to domestic consumers that we need to start consuming more of what we produce home, and
So
it
then-
also makes what we export much more competitive. So I think that it doesn't have to happen immediately, because I think there are some steps that need to happen. First of all, improving the overall business environment, and then we say, okay, we need to move this very important variable in the direction that signals to our economy this is the direction that we want to go in. And then you would immediately see that that price signal starts to send a message to all actors in this economy that this is the direction of the economy. It's not going to be sustainable to simply continue to import cheap things while we have things that we can produce here that are much more price competitive against those imports. So it's going to be part of this suite of interventions that has to happen. So like I say, it's not going to transform things on its own.
Yeah.
It has to be part of an overall comprehensive reform program.
What if this doesn't start happening, not just the depreciation, but also just looking into how we can boost local production and diversifying the economy? If we don't start doing that, how do you see, where do you see Trinidad heading, let's say in the next 5-10 years?
Well, the foreign exchange reserves have dwindled considerably over the last 10 years. I would say maybe 2014, 2015, we had about 12 months of import cover. That's probably down to about 6 months now. And the trajectory is to say that, if you think about the next 10 years, you'll have very little foreign exchange reserves, and you will be forced to do this. But the pain then will even be greater, because what will have to happen is that the government will have to now cut expenditure considerably, because now it will have to actually constrict the economy and actually lead to a forced contraction of the economy by cutting expenditure. Because then once you cut expenditure, you reduce overall levels of consumption, and therefore you reduce the demand for imports. So it's going to have to happen in a very much more, I would say, painful manner if we don't start dealing with it now via a comprehensive reform program. Now, I see that happening if we don't start putting things in place now to start ensuring that we produce more things locally and consume more things locally, and therefore export our excess production for FX earnings. Yes, because we're not going to be able to produce everything that we need to consume. I'm not saying that we have to produce everything that we consume. I'm saying that with respect to 70% of what we currently have in our basket of consumption items being of imports, that percentage needs to come down. And I would say ideally it should be reversed. It should be about 30% of imports in our consumption basket and 70% local. And then on top of that, if I just want to remind you that if you start producing more, then you know that your people will require more skills to work in this labor market. And so there's an incentive to educate people more. It means that part of this comprehensive program requires an overall transformation of the education system as well as the health system, because you need strong human capital for this type of economy. When you have a production economy, it sends the right signals that that human beings are the most important factor, asset of this economy, and therefore we need to invest in them, not simply be spending money to help them consume, because they are going to be important to maintain this. And I just want to say something as well. By 2100, the population of Trinidad and Tobago is expected to fall by a third. These are issues that need to be dealt with now. How are we going to do that? And why is our population falling? Well, one, because we're not producing enough goods and therefore not producing enough good jobs. So you have many people who have migrated over time. You also, because people can't find good jobs, the birth rate has fallen. In 1960, the birth rate in Trinidad and Tobago was about 41 per thousand population. Now it's down to 11 per thousand population. That's not good. And when you look at it, we're also going to have a very much aging population, meaning that the working age population will have a significant burden on them to pay taxes to support those who cannot work, those who are young and those who are older. These are the types of things that we have to start looking now. So when I say that this economy needs to transform, we have to look at it in terms of what's coming at us and why doing the status quo is no longer plausible and not fit for purpose. And things need to change drastically. We can't wait on 2100 to deal with that problem. This problem needs to start happening now and start reversing the trends, reversing the FX trend that we've seen, reversing the population trend, and reversing the trend and giving our people back dignity and improving the human condition. And of course, I'd say that is related to the type of education system that we have harnessed over the last, I would say, generation. We need to change that completely. And we need to also give our people good health care for all.
So we actually have a comment from a viewer. Right now it's up on the screen. I'll read: who would benefit from this devaluation, the rich or the poor? They will say prices will increase and we have to pay more, but the wealthy could take a little pressure and lose a few dollars. They won't die until the economy picks up in a year or two. TNT went through this many times in my 63 years, and we held the strain until the economy picked up.
So again, coming back to this, I am not here saying that there isn't going to be some pain, but what I'm saying is that the government spends a considerable amount of its budget on transfers and subsidies, and currently those transfers and subsidies are blanket transfers and subsidies, meaning if you think about it, we subsidize fuel for everyone. Who benefits more from that? It's really the wealthy people who own vehicles and who drive many more distances. Who benefits more from cheap electricity? It's the wealthy people who have their homes all air conditioned. And what I'm saying is that that type of blanket subsidy has to stop, and we can take some of those resources and target the interventions of support for those who most need it in the society. Right now, we are spending money in a blanket way, and the people who are really benefiting are the more wealthy and well-off in the society, because they have the wherewithal to consume more electricity, to consume more fuel via their vehicles, via their large homes. That has to stop. We need to start targeting our interventions towards those people who need it, and therefore reduce the overall level of government outlays, but ensuring that when we're spending money to help those in society, we're helping those people who really need it. So I think this is the type of overall implementation plan that is required. And this has to be comprehensive and thought out properly. Time to target into interventions. And so when we devalue, yes, there's going to be some pain, but let us now target the support to those people who really need it, rather than how we're doing now, whereby we're really benefiting the wealthy in society more, if you really think about it.
I get that. And I know we do have to wrap now, but before we do so, can you just, leave us with a message, something, I guess, that we can look to positive about the situation and how we should, why we should consider this option?
But first of all, I just want to say that this vision for the economy is really rooted in my belief that we need to start prioritizing how people live, their condition, and to start targeting their earnings over their lifetime. And I think if you think about if you want to improve the earnings of people over their lifetime, one, they have to have a good labor market to work in. You can only have a good labor market to work in if you are producing things yourself. And secondly, you need to ensure that those people have good education. And you will have a much higher incentive to give everyone a good education if there's a good job for them to go out. So I want to say to people that this vision is grounded in one that says, look, we need to start prioritizing the welfare of our people, because ultimately that's what's important in development. It's not about foreign exchange reserves. Yes, that's an important indicator and measure, but it's not the be-all and end-all. The most important indicator for us has to be the condition of our citizens and those who reside in this place. And that has to come from giving everyone an opportunity to work and to earn as much during their working years. And that means that we have to have an economy that produces more, and we have an incentive to educate them and to give them good health care as well. And I think that can only come about if we have an economy that produces more. And I think that can only happen if we have an exchange rate that signals that we want an economy that produces more, not simply an economy that is one of consuming cheap imports from abroad.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ram, for sharing your perspective on this topic. Clearly, there are strong arguments on both sides of this conversation. So our hope is that these discussions give our viewers the insight they need to better understand and the choices ahead for Trinidad and Tobago. So we appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so that brings us to the end of AM Prime this morning. I will leave you with this. The only time you fail is when you fall down and stay down. And that is a quote by Stephen Richards. So guys, stay safe, stay informed, stay inspired. Thank you for joining me on the program today for viewing. We have Sean Michael Small on the hour right now with Talking Point. So don't go too far. I'll see you back here again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
WESN.
This is the WESN News on the Hour. I'm Sean Michael Small. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Venezuelan Defense Minister warns Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana will get an answer. 19 Venezuelan nationals detained in Southwestern Division. Rolling vehicle kills granddad, 3-year-old grandson survives. And internationally, China accuses NVIDIA of violating anti-monopoly laws. Now for the details. Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino Lopez has issued a stern warning to the governments of Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana as tensions in the Southern Caribbean continues to escalate. Venezuela has accused the U.S. of seeking regime change under the pretense of fighting narco-trafficking and warned TNT that it will receive an answer if it allows the U.S. to use TNT soil to launch an attack on their country. A fleet of U.S. warships has been camped in the Southern Caribbean for the past 2 weeks, and on September the 2nd blew up a pirogue allegedly carrying illegal drugs from Venezuela to Trinidad. All 11 people aboard the vessel were killed. In a message on his Telegram channel on September the 14th, Lopez said, To the TNT government who has lent themselves for this game, I say, well, if they, the United States, attack us from their TNT territory, you will also receive an answer. An answer and all will be legitimate defense. Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar has expressed full support for the U.S. military presence to tackle narco trafficking, specifically out of Venezuela. A .14 man and 19 Venezuelan nationals who are here in the country illegally were arrested by officers of the Southwestern Division during anti-crime operations. In the first incident, a 30-year-old .14 man was held after 5 Venezuelan nationals ages 21 to 33 were found at his home. The exercise was conducted by personnel of the Southwestern Division Task Force and .14 CID. Meanwhile, in the Erin district, a total of 14 Venezuelan nationals ages 5 to 40 who entered the country illegally were found hiding behind a pirogue on a beach last night by personnel of the Marine Interdiction Unit. Officers of the Erin police station were contacted and the foreigners were detained. Immigration Division and Children's Authority personnel were also contacted. Investigations are ongoing. A 78-year-old grandfather was killed on Saturday when he was struck and run over by a vehicle while holding his 3-year-old grandson. The child survived the incident and is listed in stable condition at the hospital. The deceased was identified as Jimmy Ball of Chicklin Road, Caparo. The incident, police said, occurred around 4:30 p.m. on an agricultural property off Forestry Road, Tamana Road, Talparo. Police said a silver Mitsubishi Pajero was parked on the property when it began to roll backwards. At the time, Ball was standing behind the vehicle holding his grandson, Nathaniel Ball, and was struck as the vehicle rolled over them. The vehicle eventually came to a stop approximately 30 feet away on a stack of metal rubble. Emergency medical services responded to the scene. Ball was transported by paramedics to the Arima General Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 7:20 p.m. The child was taken to the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex, Mount Hope, and was attended to. Internationally, China's market regulator has said U.S. computer chip maker Nvidia has violated Chinese anti-monopoly laws. The country's market watchdog did not give details of how Nvidia had breached the rules, but said it would continue to investigate the matter. The news came as U.S. and Chinese officials held a second day of trade talks in Spain on Monday in the latest attempt to end a trade war between the world's two biggest economies. Following the talks, U.S. President Donald Trump hinted that a deal had been reached with China to avert a U.S. ban on TikTok. The social media app was facing a ban in America unless it found a U.S. buyer. The U.S.-China trade talks in Spain were led by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Sean Michael Small. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Remember waking up early just to catch your favorite cartoons? WESN brings back those magical mornings with Retro Saturdays.
Thus, the Powerpuff Girls were born!
Where the young at heart relive the fun. Join us every Saturday from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, only on WESN, the content capital.
WESN.
Yesterday was a hell of a thing. Usually, I'm not necessarily having to commute through the heavy rains, but yesterday I got to experience it almost firsthand. Reports are that San Fernando and Pinal also flooded, but I could assure you Port of Spain seemingly definitely flooded. From what I understand, just even into the night, 6, 7 o'clock, traffic was still affected. I'm not entirely sure to what extent, because it's just one of those things where you even if you're in the middle of it, you know where there was traffic where you were, but you don't necessarily know how widespread it was. But I would imagine if it was affecting the Savannah to the severity that it potentially was, if not Port of Spain, then parts of the Lady Young and maybe the highway. And for the last couple of days, last week and this week, driving in the weather, it wasn't just rain. It was one of those instances, or more often than not now, at least for part of it, you're caught in the rain if you're driving, where your windshield wipers don't really help you see. They part the water for a brief second, and you're kind of having to go in between the deluge on your glass. It presents a challenge to the government. This is not necessarily something, because make no mistake, the rain was that heavy. We probably, even with our best foot forward and with a lot more invested into drainage, we might have still had issues with flooding yesterday and at certain points in times in the last 2 weeks. So it's not necessarily fair to say, well, I thought the government had flooding handled. Can't necessarily blame them for it when, the downpour is so severe. But you could still assess them based on how they're going to handle the situation in the moment and how they're going to handle the situation moving forward. Because the problem with flooding is not just, it's flooding and maybe it'll add 10 to 15 minutes to your commute. No, it's going to potentially impact the productivity of the country depending on where floods. It's going to impact the livelihoods of people depending on where floods. It's going to cause people to lose a lot of money from the value of their homes. It could get water damage. They could lose furniture, appliances, etc., depending on where floods. And heaven forbid, all of the construction on the northern range, not just in the shadow of the northern range. At what point will we have a catastrophe? And I hate to say this, but I'm beginning to start to have the mindset of when, not if, a landslip and a house is sent tumbling down the mountain. And the question is, what's going to catch it? Is it going to be an empty field? Is it going to be rainforest? Or is it going to be more houses? Think about it. Should we take it for granted, given the fact that there are many examples where there isn't or there doesn't seem to be sufficient planning with regards to who builds what where, is it appropriate, is proper drainage part of the plans, etc., etc. Whatever the project is, commercial, housing, government, private, there seems to be deficiencies in decision making. We've even had situations where projects were built in flood-prone areas. So why are we now going to assume that it's safe? Everything built on the mountain was properly considered, assessed, and determined to be safe, especially when we can't guarantee that there will be limits on the amount of rain, how hard it is, how sudden it is. If we fail to prepare, then we should prepare to fail. That is the old saying. Anyone that has gone to a secondary school in this country has probably heard at least once. So on what level are we prepared to fail with regards to the various facets, the various consequences that comes with the simple term of flooding? It's almost like a joke and we treat it lightheartedly. You know, the clouds sneeze, parts of the country flood. Well, no, it wasn't just a sneeze. It wasn't just a sniffle yesterday. It was a full-blown out, runny nose, snot dripping down the face cold. Are we prepared for more of this potentially? Not every year are we going to have a drier than normal wet season. I think the scientists got it right when they moved from global warming to climate change, because it's unpredictable. Partly because we don't know. We like to assume that we know things about science. We know how the weather patterns work. We know how it works in theory. There was an ice age long before human carbon emissions were available to increase the temperature to thaw the world out of that. Do we really know everything? Could we really predict everything? And even if we deal with our carbon emissions, how long will that take? It's not like we could depend on climate change changes, compensatory or fixes or solutions for that to stabilize our weather patterns. How prepared are we for changes in the weather patterns, more extreme weather? Because ironically, we have to deal with the potential for not enough rainfall and too much. And this does not necessarily bode well for that one random time when God decides, hey, we can't send all the hurricanes to Haiti or Grenada. It has to move a little bit more south this time. It's not just up to the current administration. Something like this requires a term-by-term effort. There are certain things that require us to look beyond political allegiances, beyond whose pet project is whose and who gets to claim credit. There are certain things like crime where one would hope the hallmarks would not be what I was able to do, but rather what I was able to add. Not what I was able to replace. What is your legacy on crime? I'll replace it with mine. No. What I can add to make the situation better. And perhaps, ultimately speaking, as long as we're in that mindset, our development will be capped. It will have a very low ceiling. We will never be able to progress past a certain point because we can't give enough consideration to long-term thinking enough to see beyond what's right in front of our face. The political bubble and bacchanal, which really at the end of the day is merely the mutterings and masquerades of fools that take us on a ride. Now, the student who was in a fight with a teacher apparently was placed in a police-run after-school program. This is one of those things where we're going to have to figure out better and better ways to deal with more extreme behavior from children, because it's a catch-22. What do you do with murderers and the worst of the worst criminals? Well, you lock them up and throw away the key, and of course, in certain cases like murderers, based on our laws, you sentence them to death, and in theory, that's the punishment, but we know that right now, practically, it's commuted to a life sentence. What do you do for young people? Because there will be very few exceptions where their behavior gets to that extreme, where the obvious solution is to just throw them away, never to be seen or heard from again, hopefully. There might be none in any year group of behavior that extreme. But if you give up on them, then you push them further and further to deviant behavior and a life of crime. If you don't give up on them, but you don't know how to treat it properly, they potentially become a disruption or a threat to the other students and maybe to the other teachers. Not saying that teachers do not have responsibility for their actions, but the catalyst is a disruptive element that is difficult to control. That is, at the end of the day, the issue. By their very nature, children do not always have the correct judgment and thus need proper guidance, and at times, certain measures of control, certain boundaries need to be set to prevent them from going beyond that point. They could exercise judgment within those boundaries depending on their age, depending on levels of maturity, depending on their proven track record of behavior. Some younger people who have proven to be more responsible and we give them more leeway than some who have proven to be reckless daredevils, which is fine when you're an adult, but it's not so much when adults have to be responsible for your safety. But what came out of this situation is an interesting point from the NPTA president. Apparently, because of the situation between a teacher and a student, they objected in the past for police officers to be armed in school. Now we're saying that they want officers armed to be capable to respond to things. And I'm wondering exactly what type of response is he thinking about? Because based on my conversations with ASP Arun yesterday, if it is a fight between teachers and students, or a teacher and a student, you would want the police officer potentially as the professional who also will have enough physical force to overwhelm the situation and subdue it with the least chance of injury. It's actually riskier for him to do that while carrying a firearm. And from what I understood, my takeaway from the conversation yesterday with ASP Arun is a police officer armed with a firearm is not supposed to get involved in a physical confrontation just so. Now, not all of them need to be armed. And more importantly, if we're talking about a fight between teachers and students, do they need to be armed in order to break up that fight? I do wonder if perhaps the NPTA is thinking about escalation, which, as we've seen, can come from outside the school, potentially. It's one of those things where, to some extent, you're not going to be able to have a perfect solution. You could just have the one that will be the best solution for most circumstances. There will be some outlier situation where I wish instead of this we did that. But you can't necessarily have expectations those outliers are bound to happen. Should police be armed in schools? I'll go back to what I said initially. I think is probably the best way to do it. When the Prime Minister said, let the people who are on the ground make the decision, let them make the decision. Their superiors could give general guidelines, right? The guideline could be, hey, if possible, don't be armed in schools. It's an extra complication that can have severe consequences if a whole host of various scenarios happen where things go wrong. But there's enough leeway in order for, if deemed necessary, you can have one of the officers armed, all of the officers armed. It all depends. One of the interesting things about jobs like this is the temptation to micromanage because you don't want to take risks. Whereas generally speaking, the best way to implement policies like this is to have the people on the ground have certain amounts of leeway in certain situations, because at the end of the day, only they know the specifics of what challenges they face. And they're supposed to have the training in order to do the job properly. If they need to be micromanaged, then are they really up for the task? If they're not up for the task, is the training sufficient? Are the policy sufficient? Is the oversight sufficient? At the end of the day, this is but a temporary solution to a longer term problem. But similar to what I say about crime, you can't just only have the blinkers on and say social programs, long-term solutions, improvements in the economy, better job opportunities. Those that have given in to the temptation to commit crime, that's not going to help them. Those who are committed to carrying out violent crime, that's not going to make a difference for them. You need to also have the hard measures to arrest the situation in the immediate to short term and potentially into the medium term to give you a chance to get to the long term, to have as much people survive so that the long-term solutions could then bring it to the hopeful conclusion. And it's the same thing to some extent with school violence. Long-term solutions on social programs and things like that, you need that in order to ensure that the issues are solved, that they don't reoccur. But you put a Band-Aid to prevent the cut from bleeding all over the place. Usually a Band-Aid is, in terms of implementing a solution to an issue, it's a negative connotation. But what is a Band-Aid for? It literally is that. It's to cover up the wound, to prevent it from getting worse. While your body heals, that's the long-term solution for the cut or the injury. We can't have the schools being disrupted by school violence, so send the police in. But note, that in and of itself is not going to guarantee that the situation is over. And now this added dimension of being armed in school, ah boy. Now, a couple things before we take the break. The officer that was involved in the death of Jamal Charles being the deceased SRP who got shot in the head or neck, he is still in custody. He has not reportedly given a statement. And I guess there are a lot of questions as to what exactly happened. While I do think this is probably not a scenario that will be prone to be repeated, at the same time, the public deserves answers insofar that this could potentially negatively impact the trust and confidence in officers like municipal police, SRPs, and the like, of having certain powers and authorities like the power to carry firearms. And it also potentially infringes on the whole situation with having firearms in school. If this scenario, whatever happened here that led to the officer getting shot, happened in a school environment, something similar, while I don't think it's likely, while I think it is not probable, it's improbable, we're playing percentages here. This is not the kind of thing where you just say, oops, my bad, and move on. So apparently they were playing with their pistols. This is one way how it was framed. I don't know how true that is. And then, of course, there's wider questions with regards to how are officers being trained about gun safety. Yes, training. And I'll close with this. A lot of people, both abroad and here in TNT, took to social media to weigh in on the whole situation of Charlie Kirk being murdered. And who believed he deserved it, who believed he didn't deserve it. Now, one of the interesting things with regards to the American media is that there are certain personalities who I've identified as being staunchly on the right, staunchly on the left. I generally tend to not consume a lot of American political media anymore because when I was looking at those things, it was mostly with regards to more outsider, independent people when there were ideological debates, and it was debated. But at some point, it became bubble, and it didn't really make a difference to me. I don't care how, watching a personality destroy an argument or whatever sensationalized title they put on the video, even if I technically agree with the basic premise of it, doesn't make a difference to me. Usually, that's not actually what happens. But while the internet has become very much biased, I found it very interesting and heartening to see even staunch liberal media personalities treat the situation responsibly. Because they, I believe, identified that the death of Charlie Kirk was not just about the death of a conservative, but rather the implications of political violence and the fact that murder is not justified just because you have disagreements. Sentiments that seemingly was lost by many Trinbagonians, of course, that's relatively speaking anecdotal, right? It's not like I scoured social media to see how many people was for or against this issue. Part of me was finding it somewhat strange how strongly Trinis viewed it, but it is what it is. And they made their posts. But like I said, even the liberal personalities understood this was bigger than just the disagreement, because if we start killing each other for political disagreement, where does that end? And now the US government is warning that foreigners who celebrated Charlie Kirk's death, they may have an issue getting US visas moving forward. Because part of what you have to do is give out your social media handles, your credentials. They will check. And we've heard reports of people having negative commentary on Trump getting issues with US visas, right? And on that level, that seems like a partisan situation. I'm not sure if I agree with that. Now, as it was pointed out by, I believe, the US government, the US visa is a privilege, not a right. At the end of the day, we are not citizens of that country. But I thought if it was because you had a disagreement politically with the current president, that was kind of silly to me. But he's only going to be there for 4 years, and just people need to kind of wisen up, live with it, and that might not change, that might not stand for long. But I think in this situation, though, the principle behind it is not about conservatism or liberalism. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's about the fact that there was a political assassination. People might not agree. I don't know. It really depends on a court on how they find it. Some could determine it. Well, no, I won't go there. But it was an assassination. It was a murder based on political ideology. If you want to stretch it, you could call it terrorism, but no demands were technically made of the government, so I won't say it is. And then there was another category, I won't go there either. Regardless, for the American government is well within its rights to say, we don't want anyone in our country that's going to celebrate a political assassination. Because it doesn't matter who it is. It could have been a liberal icon. It could have been a conservative icon. It could have been Mother Teresa. It could have been the most hated man in politics, as long as he's not a criminal. And even if he was a criminal, this situation undergoed no due process. It wasn't any sort of legal sanction killing. As much as you might disagree and believe that Charlie Kirk was vile and evil and what have you, at the end of the day, it is an illegal act and it is an immoral act. If you supposedly are better than, why would you stoop so low? And whereas I think banning people from getting visas because they don't like Trump is silly, I could easily see where both sides of the American political divide in Washington will say, hold on, we ain't want nobody in here that's going to say anything positive about political violence because it's our necks on the line. And if you all want to treat our nation and our politics as frivolously as that, then stay home. And that's what I couldn't understand. His death, yes, I understand. People want to turn it into a political issue. It's not. It's a legal issue. It's a moral issue. It's a warning. Let's not go that far and then take it further, because it will start a vicious cycle. It will open Pandora's box, a door that will be difficult to close. And my initial commentary on this station was, I hope we don't see something like that here. Because what a lot of people don't realize is most politicians, the extreme rhetoric that they put out, life isn't that extreme. The truth isn't that extreme. They're saying those things to win points. They don't actually want you to take up arms to go physically assault and kill the other side. But apparently, some people, they think it's all fun and games because it doesn't affect them. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll go into the daily review. A major story happened with the TTPS. I guess we went one day without national security being on the forefront. And given the Minister of Homeland Security's recent statements, this is very interesting, and it leaves us with a lot of questions which we will ask after this. Sean Michael Small, this is Talking Point in WESN. We'll be right back after this. Stay tuned. Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
is Dr. Joanne Williams-Carroll, and I am the Director of Behavioral and Mental Health at the Community Hospital. At the Community Hospital, we believe in nurturing mind, body, and soul. Through our counseling and chaplaincy program, we will provide you with support and strength you need to help with your mental and emotional well-being. Give us a call.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
All right, all the U.S.-Venezuela stuff notwithstanding, because that is a situation that I guess we're in the middle of it now, right? Not the biggest international incident, but it is what it is. But no, the big story today is what happened with the TTPS and its senior leadership. Now, with regard to the executive, oh boy, the Commissioner of Police, first of all, the new Commissioner of Police, he has decided to shake up the executive. All three DCPs had their positions or their responsibilities essentially reshuffled. It's like reshuffling cabinet almost. Now, I don't know what the specifics are on the, I guess you could say, how it works, the mechanics of it, what the limitations are whatsoever. 3 DCPs, 3 portfolios, and they played musical chairs apparently. It's reported that none of them knew that this was going to happen before they were given the notices that it was happening. And at least according to one newspaper, they were not able to reach them for any comment on the situation. Now, let's take a pin on why this might be happening, because we are left to speculate. And I just want to say this up front, and I'll probably reiterate this again later on. Given what the Minister of Homeland Security said about the lack of support for the commissioner, it's hard not to look at this reshuffling and not think that there's something there. Now, granted, this is the catch. Given that public figures in TNT seemingly are oblivious and don't always understand why the public responds the way it does, there's not a 0% chance that perhaps the Commissioner of Police and whoever's advising him, and potentially if he liaised with or consulted with Minister Alexander, they may not have anticipated how it will look, although to me it seems quite obvious, right? With regards to just having a statement about a lack of support for the commissioner and then making major changes, which at least in theory doesn't make total sense. So first off, DCP Operations, who I guess you could say Junior Benjamin, former DCP Operations, now he is DCP for Administration. On one hand, the thought of taking an officer who seemingly has the respect of the country and therefore will help support or further trust and confidence in police operations, taking him from that post and putting him in administration, which at least on paper is the, yeah, go just be the Ray area office guy. It seems as though it might be a misuse of his skills or talents, but, stick a pin in that. We'll come back to that in a bit. Of course, DCP Intelligence and Investigation, Suzette Martin, she is now apparently DCP for Operations. Now, to some extent, And it was reported in the article that officers, more junior officers or officers low in the ranks, not necessarily junior, it could be middle officers, middle ranked officers, I'm not sure, brought up again the questions of this officer is under investigation, certain other senior officers who were sent on leave. It doesn't make sense. The situations that are potentially, depending on your point of view, hanging over the head of Suzette Martin, it makes you wonder, is it appropriate for her to be DCP operations? Well, technically speaking, she still was in a major role in intelligence and investigations anyway. So, to what extent is this shift not necessarily changing her situation as much as we would think? Then there is the former DCP of administration, Natasha George. She is now DCP of intelligence and investigations. Generally speaking, from what I understand, I don't know how true this is or if this applies 100% for all cases, but there's a certain group of female police officers who primarily, they become police officers to be administration officers. They don't necessarily have field experience. I suspect that was part of the underlying issue with the former commissioner of police. I don't have any proof of this. I don't know what her career was like. I don't have her file. But we'll just use results-based analysis and say that's what an admin officer in a non-admin role, that's about as bad as it could look. Do we have to wonder if DCP George might be a career admin officer being thrusted into a non-admin role? So that was one of the first questions I had. Now, again, to be fair to DCP George, I don't know her. I don't know what her record is. I don't know what she's capable of. And I also don't know what the demands of intelligence and investigation are, right? And then we also now have to ask what might the potential internal politics of the situation be. Because while the Minister of Homeland Security was quick to try and pump the brakes on any speculation with regards to his displeasure being aimed at any of the police executive, that is to say the 3 DCPs, given the shakeup, we are still left with questions. What is the motivation behind it? Now, there is some school of thought where sometimes you just need to shake things up because people get complacent. People start to utilize the same old methods. They don't necessarily try to innovate. They don't necessarily have the same energy and gusto because it's a pattern that they started to just fall into and to some extent take for granted. You know, same old problems, so we'll approach them the same old way, but we need improvement. So the commissioner of police might be saying, hey, I need to shake things up in order to light a fire under people. Maybe with new responsibilities, you might have new energy or new approaches to do things. New approaches to do things. One of the interesting things is it is the DCP administration's responsibility for certain tasks like sending officers on leave, and I would imagine with regards to personnel decisions, transfers, and the like. We don't have an explanation for this, but ACP Meister, he was sent on leave. 16 months accrued vacation leave effective Monday. Now, there's 2 sides to this, right? First of all, apparently, he was up for a DCP position, and he did undergo certain testing and evaluations. So if a DCP had to go on leave, he could act in that role. But now he's been sent on 16 months. Now, on one hand, this could be an attempt to, hey, we need you to get your leave out. And when you come back, we won't have all of this leave accumulated that you're not necessarily supposed to accumulate. And then maybe we could send some of the other DCPs on leave. Most of the senior officers are young enough where they're looking at, from what I've been told, around a decade in service before they retire. They are significantly younger than some of their predecessors, like earlier with Christopher. And it is technically not appropriate for senior officers to, or any officers to have a year of leave, 2 years of leave accrued, right? But we've had state of emergencies and carnival every year, periods where you can't go on vacation. We are in a state of emergency right now. We had a similar question with regards to when certain other defense force or national security officers were sent on leave. Why now? Because it's not as though, I believe it's like you're not supposed to have on a 90 days leave or something like that. So when you have over a year of accrued vacation time that you haven't taken yet, you're well past the limit. Why now? Similar questions, I believe, with regards to the Commissioner of Prisons. It wasn't as though they now reached the limit and the seniors, the minister, the commissioner, whatever, said, all right, you know, we really should not go beyond the limit. You got to take your leave and then you'll come back. Because it's during a state of emergency. Even in normal times without a state of emergency, that question is valid. But during a state of emergency, when seemingly nobody's going on leave, we're sending people on leave. Remember, when the minister himself, while still up being a senior superintendent, I believe, he had like 2 years or more of vacation accrued. He was sent on, I believe it was pre-retirement leave. That wasn't during a state of emergency, if my memory serves correct. And that's on all had questions, but it's like, hey, it wasn't carnival, it wasn't a state of emergency. At some point, you either pay him out or you let him take his leave, and I guess we can't afford to pay everybody out. ACP Meister was to some extent popular. ACP Meister not being promoted had questions. ACP Meister, is he one of the disgruntled officers that had a hard time working with the new commissioner? Because his profile was public before the commissioner's profile. To a lot of people, the commissioner, the candidate that is now the commissioner, seemingly came out of nowhere. He's an intelligence officer, special branch. He did work with international partners, yes, but whenever we had those investigations that led to drug busts and the like, it's not as though the officers involved, we had a lot of photo opportunities and the like, and a lot of public speaking appearances and the like, at least in my recollection. He wasn't an ACP, he wasn't a DCP, and now he's commissioner. But we also had the shake-up in the DCPs. Now, Natasha George was the one that sent the letter out for Wayne Meister. But is there something about saying, okay, Junior Benjamin, for whatever reason, does the commissioner need him in administration? Maybe the commissioner doesn't need him in operations. Maybe he needs him in administration because the commissioner seems to have a somewhat hands-on approach. Of course, operations, in theory, on paper at least, should not suffer. Now, I'm not entirely sure, again, how the skills of former intelligence investigation, Suzette Martin, will translate to operations. But at the very least, she's more on the doing side of the force as opposed to the back-end support side. But the two jobs are not necessarily the same thing. I do find intelligence and investigations a weird, in some ways, a weird combination when another DCP is in operations, right? But the idea is, her previous portfolio is to find the intelligence and turn that into evidence. Her new portfolio is to act on it. To what extent is she a good fit? And of course, I already asked these questions about Natasha George. So it leads us back to the Commissioner of Police. Are we going to get an explanation as to what's going on? Because if we don't get an explanation, unfortunately, it's going to lead to speculations about the internal politics of the situation, about the potential rifts of the situation. And there are various scenarios that people might come up with, right? Based on rumor, hearsay, preconceived notions, etc., speculation on the history of these individuals. But at the end of the day, it's a catch-22. If you don't say anything about it, one of the reasons potentially could be because it's about the internal politics of the situation. And you don't necessarily want to lie about it, right? So all you could do is refrain from talking about it. That's how some people are going to take it. And even if there was a more benign reason for doing it, given how politics works in this country, I mean, we just had a DCP arrest his predecessor at the beginning of the year. We don't even have a proper explanation as to what happened there. It's hard to look at the situation and say, yeah, no, it's fine, you know, this is more business as usual. We shouldn't read into this at all. Nothing to see here. It's really, really hard to try to sell people on that. It really is. Now, we're in a very odd spot where we are potentially, this is our executive for the next 5 to 10 years. It will take a lot, apparently, to remove any of them. One of the ways one of the things that you do with a permanent secretary, you can't necessarily fire them outright, but you could transfer them. We don't have that many roles for DCPs. But to what extent is this potentially showing the executive A? We could work things out informally to sideline you. That was one of the thoughts that I had. Right now, ironically, the commissioner is in a similar situation to the prime minister. A lot of the goodwill that has turned the situation around is centered around him and his appointment. Now, granted, he has to prove himself in the long run, otherwise his capital with the public will be limited. And at the end of the day, his post, like a prime ministerial position, you need to have results, otherwise in the long run, it's just not going to fly. But given the fact that the rest of the executive were basically part of what we've seen before, regardless of whether or not you want to pin all the blame on Erla or not, they were there, at least to some extent. The public doesn't necessarily have the same level of trust in them as they do with the new commissioner, especially since he has accounted for himself well in certain areas at the very least, with regards to engaging, communicating with the public. But now he's in a tricky situation. Because he can't just bury his head in the sand and leave it alone and hope things works out. And he can't fire DCPs. He could fire and discipline people below that rank. But the DCPs, as well as himself, are left up to the Police Service Commission, an institution which has been marred by recent events as much as the police service itself, where the public probably looks at the Service Commission funny as it does the police service. We have crafted this thing that makes the smooth operations of the service difficult if certain challenges are put forward in front of the service, if certain conditions are met. There's no system that's going to be foolproof. But I do wonder if, I don't know if it's going to be a minor tweak or a major change, if the system on how the police executive is selected, appointed, or promoted, disciplined, and the capacity to remove them needs to be rethought, needs to be changed. It might not be a big change, it could be a small change. One small change, if a DCP retires early, they won't get their full benefit. So at least they won't get it until they're 60. So they'll have a 5-year gap, something like that. The problem is, again, the executive is, well, it's younger than a lot of, it's significantly young to the point where senior superintendents currently do not have any realistic chance of being further promoted. Now, in the American military, what would happen is when you have young, high-ranking generals, they would retire early to make way for their juniors to have a path to promotion and not just stay in their seats because, at least in the American military, if you're not promoted, you're sent out. With regards to the TTPS, I think there's something similar depending on your rank. But more importantly, to what extent now should an entire generation of officers essentially look upwards at their career and realize that they're stuck? Because the people above them, basically, unless something happens, are not going to move on from their posts for a decade. But it also speaks to the fact that if we have officers in a questionable situation, what do? The government was to some extent lucky with the previous commissioner in that she was already near retirement. And maybe that's why they kept her, the PNM, as opposed to promoting one of her DCPs who would have been younger, because they knew she was on a short leash. They had to renew every year. She served at the pleasure or displeasure. Meanwhile, crime is down. Hopefully it stays down. But there are reasons for me to believe that unless we figure this out in the long run, these methods that we've been able to see success with are short-term measures. They too are band-aids. This whole situation with the US is complicating the matters, potentially in the short run in our favor, but in the long run with regards to the criminal activities in the region, unless it is part of a solution for crime, and it's very difficult to see how it will be part of a long-term permanent solution. Just the nature of criminal activities and the nature of the beast. There will be blowback that not a lot of the people who are complaining about the situation are anticipating. And I've mentioned it before. You create a vacuum in the criminal activities of the region. Criminals still going to break laws and try to find a quick buck, and they don't necessarily care who they have to step on or kill to make that money. You take away the drug supply, you take away senior leadership, you open the doors for radical shifts to happen, some out of desperation, some in order to aggressively acquire or grasp onto new opportunities that they see it. Are we ready for that? If our police service is having to deal with internal issues and we don't really have a mechanism in order to nip it in the bud. Think about it. Depending on how the internal issues of the senior police leadership goes, the government, unless they make legislative changes, they could only do so much. And in a way, I have to admit, it is kind of crazy. As much as the office of the commissioner is supposed to be independent, it's one of those, I'm going to use the phrase again, catch-22 situations. The performance of the police service will reflect on cabinet, will reflect on the government of the day. So it's unreasonable to suggest that they should have no say. To what extent, however, you want them to be out of police affairs. In truth, it should be up to the office of the commissioner to sort of enforce that. But if things aren't working and go out of hand, to be stuck in a situation that is untenable. Is it untenable? I don't know. Again, we don't know what's going on with the Brent Thomas situation. Will we ever get a proper resolution to that? breaking the law like that with no accountability, it's very hard for us to then have any realistic degree of expectation that the dynamics of the police service, the criminal justice system, and the government is in a healthy place. As much as this is a different government, because the precedent is set, because the loophole is there. And it's not even a loophole that is a legal technicality. It is the loophole of things could happen, we're not going to do anything about it. Seemingly. Yes, I know there's a second police investigation. I don't really have a lot of faith that anything is going to come out of it. And it's not to say that Suzette Martin is guilty, but rather, as it has been said before, who sent her on that expedition? What actually happened? Who made what decision? Was that decision valid? Were those actions based on the instructions of whoever gave whatever instructions valid? Who will be held responsible for an international incident? Something that I want to just mention briefly. I'm not necessarily sure. I've heard some of the conversations about it. Some of our colleagues, we spoke about it as it was happening. And now looking at the reports, there is the grandparent citizenship law. Now, the narrative is that because of what happened in our match with Jamaica and the fact that apparently they have a lower threshold than we do for foreign athletes to play in TNT, we need something to kind of keep up with the Joneses, to kind of compete on the world stage. Apparently, the Football Federation has earmarked a list of names ready to see if they could bring in to join our football squad. So, rather than needing for you to have a parent, a child born outside of TT acquires citizenship by descent if at the time of birth at least one parent is a citizen of TNT, including by descent, not otherwise by descent. And that change then means grandparents. It doesn't have to be parents. The opposition is concerned that this might open the door essentially to bring in immigrants for voter padding. Now, I don't know how pertinent the fear of the opposition is. Theoretically, it's not as though this sort of ideology is one of those pie-in-the-sky Hollywood script-type plots that never happens in real life. To some extent, I don't know how true it is. I don't think there's ever been actual documentation. I could be wrong. But in the US, the prevailing thought was the Democrats wanted as much immigrants as possible because that will shift the political dynamics of their country. Turns out it doesn't work that way when a lot of immigrants are religious conservatives. Just because they're brown don't mean they're going to fall in line with your ideology. Now, to what extent is a bill like this going to cause people who would be pro-UNC necessarily, just cause? Because the diaspora, as far as I am aware, consists of multiple races, multiple backgrounds, whose parents would have multiple political affiliations or grandparents. And given the population demographic, the diaspora should be not necessarily exactly equal to the 40-40, generally speaking, split. It's really depending on what time period you look at, high 30s, right? But generally, we just kind of round it up 40-40 split, right? We don't even necessarily, when it comes to racial demographics in politics, consider the other races like Syrian, European, Caucasian, East Asian, etc., etc. So I'm not entirely sure if I fully agree that the opposition's fears are justified. Because then there's a very big practical consideration that you have to account for. Athletes wanting to play in international events like the World Cup, yeah, they'll come and play for Trinidad. Would they even come and live here full time? I don't know with regards to FIFA and its rules and if to what degree you have to be a resident as opposed to just a national. But will they come to live here full time? And they have an incentive to essentially come back to the homeland. What about the rest of the diaspora, who a lot of them chose to leave? Now, people do leave and come back for various reasons. But to say that we're going to have a mass influx of people that weren't citizens before but were connected to TNT that are going to all of a sudden want to come and live in TNT, I think that to some extent overestimates our broad appeal. We have appeal. We don't necessarily do much to market our appeal. We don't necessarily do much to promote or enhance that appeal. We have appeal. We are a place where a lot of people, from Europeans to Americans and so forth, on paper at least, would love to live. Now, depending on various circumstances, they might not choose to do so, or they might not have the capacity to do so. There will be many professionals who would love to live in the Caribbean, but their job might just not exist in the Caribbean, in part because we haven't developed economically enough yet. Certain career paths just don't exist here. If this was a situation where we took diversification more seriously, where we took economic development more seriously, where we developed the industries available to then provide a wider variety of jobs, it might be easier to then bring people on here. We do have highly skilled professionals from abroad who settle down in TNT. We have quite a few foreign doctors, not just from Cuba. It's not as though people don't necessarily want to come here, but for whatever reason, more people leave than stay. Why are we going to assume just because, okay, now you could get citizenship, that they are going to want to come in? Now, of course, not all of the diaspora is in the UK or America or Canada. It could be from other countries, right, who might have worse conditions than ours. And depending on how that works, I don't know, I don't know if we'll see an influx, and then at what point will the influx be too much, because we're already dealing with a Venezuelan migration situation. To what extent have we successfully absorbed all of the Venezuelan migrants, whether illegal or illegal? At this point, for the purpose of this discussion, that doesn't matter. But I just don't necessarily see a wave of immigration incoming. And I think that is to some extent telling that we don't have certain capacities. Part of the reason why people leave TNT is that they just can't get jobs or career opportunities or the opportunity for advancement. There's not enough of it in TNT, so for a certain quality of life, they have to go. We need to work on ourselves more before we start to actually buy into the Kool-Aid that we're like America and everybody wants to come here. Yes, people do want to come here. But if you take away the Venezuelan migrants, it might not be that serious. Meanwhile, is this good for sport? Generally, yes. From what I've been told, consulting with my colleagues, this is one of those things we do need to play catch up. But let me just put on the sporting cap and say that ain't going to solve all our problems. To some extent, this seems like a knee-jerk reaction, and you do have to ask, why wasn't this dealt with long before? And there was a back and forth on this issue, and the whole thing about voter panic and getting people in to change the election dynamics, I don't know if that's just opposition for opposition's sake or a very real fear of the PNM. But now we have it. But we still need to take sports seriously. This is what should be a sport issue, and it was turned into a highly political election issue. And that's to show you where our priorities lie. Everything else can be sacrificed on the altar of politics. Because it doesn't matter about development, it doesn't matter about national prestige, it doesn't matter about cultural advancement. What matters is, what do I do to put my party in the best position to win the next general election? And if that's the primary motivation, even if it's not necessarily directly harming sport, even in this case it might not be directly harming sport, one could argue if that's the primary motivation of politicians, are we surprised that we are stagnant? All right. We'll open up the phone lines now. Digger Martin in line. Good morning, caller. You're on air.
Good morning, Sean. And to all your listeners. This thing about citizenship, I saw where the PNM raised the issue of, and they didn't spell it out, but they alluded to voter pardon.
Mm-hmm.
I want to remind a lot of people, one of the strategies the father of the so-called father of the nation brought a lot of small islanders to vote apart, and the same strategy was attempted in Guyana with Burnham, trying to populate the country with small islanders. The same strategy as Erukelem, and it failed. But my main topic today, I like what I see with the police service. The strategy deployed by the Commissioner of Police. If he sees something is happening, he changes around in leadership. But at the same time, the Police Service Commission has to help him with weeding out the errant officers, both in the leadership role and the lower levels. So I think it's a positive sign, and something has to have happened within recent time. And the fact you send home a senior police officer for 16 months, and we under a state of emergency, for you to make that decision tells me there is something more to the motor than the peddler. And I don't want to give you a nexus with another TV host, but that is where my mind has gone.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue is that the Chief Justice and the clapback by Senior Counsel Israel Khan, he made mention, he said the man is a brilliant jurist. But he also had an appetite for something else, and he said he will not continue with it. My take on it, that has sent my thoughts all over the place, and I wouldn't draw a straight line, but I am thinking about the closure or the continued investigation in the SABGA 1997 report, and by extension there was a heinous crime committed on a junior by the name of Akil. So all those things run in my mind. The other thing is, why is the Fourth Estate continue to put on the front burner the utterances of Venezuela? And all the front newspaper, all of this, are they basically a proxy for the opposition, and is Venezuela a proxy for the opposition to destabilize the country? The present Prime Minister said if they go and interfere with Venezuela, she will help or ask or give permission to the Americans to use whatever resources we have to defend Guyana. And that's plain and simple. And the other issue, she said, drug cartel has proliferated in Trinidad, and it seems to go in out, and she needs help. And she said, if the demise of them by the way of the strike on the boat, so be it, violently dying to preserve us, because two quick calculations, Mona's Island and the nephew of a former minister, 11 people were implicated in those two things. Faris Alwari tells us it's between 19 and 25 to keep one prisoner and to house him. So those 11, a little calculation will tell us we have spent 40 million to keep those 11 prisoners in our prisons for the last 20 odd years. And the 200 Venezuelans we have to report back to Venezuela. That costing us, I do a conservative figure, 6 months they have been in prison. That costing us 24 million to house them. So it is a hefty sum for we taxpayers to pay back. And sometimes the economics justify the ends. I go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. Now, the Police Service Commission, just to clarify once again, they only have authority over the commissioner and deputy commissioners. They don't get involved with the ranks below that. From what I understand, it was different before, but this is how it is now. The commissioner is the person that essentially disciplines, promotes, and if necessarily fires people underneath. So he has the full authority to do whatever is necessary as he deems fit with regards to, I believe it's ACPs on down. He promotes ACPs. In fact, the Police Service Commission basically acknowledged that they don't get to select the ACPs. So one of the things that was said was, we have a pool of candidates which includes the ACPs and potentially below, but they don't get to promote people up to those ranks. They specifically said this about the ACPs, but I'm including senior superintendents. They don't get to promote people up to those ranks, so they don't get to determine who enters into the candidate pool to some extent, right? And it limits them on because they can't look at inspector so-and-so to be commissioner. I mean, you could, but that might be even more controversial than the current commissioner. Now, let's go with the last question first. Why does the Fourth Estate continue to put Venezuelan statements on the front page? It's an issue of objectivity, which ironically can be subjective, right? Because if you don't put it, you're a government stooge. If you put it, depending, you can be interpreted as someone supporting Venezuela. I do think what most local media does is they kind of just, they try to present everything, right? It's, if you want to consider if a media house is biased, you really should look at what they say, not necessarily what they don't say or what news they present, right? You can look at how it's presented and look at the editorials. Not even the columns, what I say is necessarily a good idea on if a media house is biased, because individual writers all have their biases, and from what I can see, it's not necessarily always the case that the biases of the individual writer is 100% in line with the biases of the editors and whoever else, if the media house is willing to be biased on a certain issue or not. For the sake of objectivity, they put everything out there, right? And that can be interpreted a certain way, as you have. I myself don't necessarily put a lot of weight in what the leaders of Venezuela say. Case in point, and I wasn't going to go into the whole topic today, but this one example I think deserves mention. They're condemning America for the attack, and they're going along with the negative sentiment by a lot of the other regional states over the American attack, the first one. But yet, I believe they're still saying, no, but it was AI, it wasn't real. Now, here's the thing. You can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to say that the Americans attacking and killing 11 people is wrong, you can't then say they did a wrong thing, but it was fake. It's either fake or it was a real action, and then you could say that the real action is wrong. So I do find it interesting why Venezuela is on this, oh, but it was just AI, it's not real. And to me, what that tells me is they are kind of the opposition in this case. They're just kind of throwing things out there to disagree with America and to craft their own narrative. And they're not necessarily crafting a coherent one. Now, to what extent are people going to run with whatever it is they say? Because And I'll say this up front, I am biased against the Venezuelan government. I do believe that they stole the last election. I do believe that the political, ideological practices that they have instituted in the country has more responsibility with regards to the reason why their economy is in the state it is than American sanctions, because that's what came first. That was in the chicken and the egg. Which came first? Their policies or American sanctions? Their policies came first. And from what I've been told by Venezuelans and people who look at the actual what's going on the ground from an economic position, there are a lot of people who have a bias for socialist and communist economic ideals and policies, but at the end of the day, there is never a working example of those things actually functioning. But for some ideologues, no, Venezuela has to be in the right because they're doing what we believe in, and what we believe in is morally right, so it must be right. And at that point, I kind of just step back from the whole situation because now we're arguing semantics. We're arguing definitions, we're arguing validity of theories without necessarily going into practical evidence, etc., etc. You know, and it gets there on both sides. So I just would prefer to leave that alone. I rather our local media present everything than to hide things. I don't think they hide things for the most part. So that's why I say, so I'm not looking for what they put or they don't put in their stories, right? Remember, a newspaper article, when you read it online, you might not get the full sense of an editorial decision. But when you have a paper, you can't always put the full thing that the reporter writes. If it doesn't fit on the page, you might have other stories that take precedence. Do you want it to be on, you know, page 3, page 5, page 4, page 7, etc., etc.? Like, there's a lot into it. Not everything is about, you know, whatever, the narrative that you craft. And of course, you have to be careful you don't use logistical considerations to potentially open yourself up to be criticized on for having a bias or lack of objectivity. But I rather they publish it because it is pertinent to us, it is speaking to us. I don't necessarily agree with what they say, but I do want to hear it, and it is good journalism for local media houses to report on what they say. Now, if they have certain editorials where, depending on what they say, I may disagree or agree with it, to some extent, it is their right. Has it reached the point where it's undermining our own government? I don't think so. I'm not to say that it can't ever get there. It possibly could, but I don't think so. That is a pretty high hurdle to jump. You know, it'll take a lot for me to say, oh yeah, they're undermining our government, our media houses with how they're reporting it. They are anti-TNT. It'll take a lot for me to say that, or even to say that they're anti the Prime Minister to an extent that is significant in this situation. Anti-UNC to an extent that is significant in this situation. It'll take a lot. It'll take a lot. And if they do go that far, they run the risk of becoming a defunct media house, depending on if too many of the public starts to look at them funny. And I don't think they're doing that yet. I don't think they're doing that. Let me not even say yet, because some people will take that the wrong way. I think we do have a comment. So let's put up the comment. I'm a retired teacher who always believed that the best way to deal with school and discipline of an extreme nature is for the perpetrators to be placed in a special school to be rehabilitated by those trained in the skills required. I'm totally against police in schools. To some extent, here's the thing. To the commenter, you're putting them as an either or. I would argue that your example shows the limitations of police in school. Because I do think that extreme indiscipline, all the police are there for is to kind of deal with the immediate, or there was an incident, so we could intervene in the incident. They can't solve the problem of extreme indiscipline in a young person who has the rest of their life ahead of them. All they could do is deal with the immediate incident to prevent harm from happening to others or to even the perpetrator themselves. So I think this is a case where your idea or what you're putting forward, your solution you're putting forward, is something that has to happen regardless of whether there are police in schools. The police in schools, to me, should be, all right, the overall misbehavior and level of violence has gone too far. We just need the police to bring it back down to manageable levels and then leave. Now, I get your criticisms of police in schools from this statement in that you're basically identifying it's not going to solve the problem. And in that, you're 100% correct. And in that, I agree with you that we most likely need a special school for rehabilitation. The trick is to actually implement it properly, effectively, right? But I don't think it's a case where we do that as opposed to police in schools. I fear, however, that perhaps decision makers might be looking at it that way. That the police are the solution. And we don't need to do what you just said, that we don't need to potentially make a special school, that we don't need rehabilitation programs. I could be wrong, but I fear that for some decision makers, for some parents, for some other stakeholders, they might be looking at it as a zero-sum game, and they're like, all right, we'll put the police in school, solve the problem. No, because the issue is, and the implication of your statement, which I believe to be correct, is the extreme behavior. Just because the police puts a stop to an act, it's not going to necessarily deal with the underlying issues that causes the student to act out. It could be poor upbringing, a lack of respect for authority. It could be because the student might have been abused in some way and doesn't know how to express themselves. It could be that the student finds themselves in a situation where they're not necessarily abused, but they're so disadvantaged and it's so stressful, and they are minors who are not fully formed adults who do not necessarily have all the tools to deal with certain situations. I never see my parents, they're working all the time. I am the eldest child. I have to mind my little brother. I have to cook dinner. I have to clean up the house. I have no free time. We have no spare money. I can't do anything. Like, we don't know. And at times you have young people with very adult problems. I live in a hot spot. I'm being harassed by the guys on the block. You know, I run the risk of being injured just to go to and from my house every day in order to go to school. I'm under a lot of stress. There's a lot of different things. And just because they have factors like that doesn't mean that it's excusable for them to act out. But the police ain't going to treat with those things. Right? Because, yes, a child could be abused and then acts out, whatever. But the thing is, that doesn't mean that you don't rehabilitate the child, because they are still now engaging in unacceptable behavior. It takes a lot to get them to a healthy place to then understand, hey, we can't be doing this. Right? And to a child now that is maybe instinctively feeling the unfairness of it all, you can't just tell him, hey, do better next time. This is unacceptable, and move on. And it's not easy to just take them out of whatever situation that they're in. Because what? You're gonna remove them from their parents permanently? Is that necessarily going to help them? To some extent, we have homes for kids. They don't always work out. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I don't know to what extent we haven't really looked at the extreme cases in order to solve the extreme cases properly, because we assume a one-size-fits-all thing. And when these extreme cases pop up, we don't know what to do. You know, doesn't the normal thing work? Do the normal thing. The normal thing's supposed to work. Do the normal thing on them. It doesn't work, do it again. You know what I mean? It doesn't work. They're kids. And I would argue this could be another situation where the welfare of our young people, the development of our education system and our mentoring situation, our guidance and child development situation, to some extent was sacrificed on the altar of politics, because it became who didn't have all the schools open and who doesn't have the budget to do the school repairs and blah, 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 blah. And what does the NTPTA says and what does tutor say and blah, 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 blah. Politics and how many teachers want raises and which school is blah, 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 blah. There are teachers and parents in the weeds fighting a good fight to solve the problem. And some of them are lucky enough, they end up in either prestige schools or schools that are good situations, even if they're government schools, and other parents are not. And then they are the negligent ones. And we don't really see positive leadership to kind of try to pull the overall situation out of the doldrums. What we get is political finger pointing, whose fault is what, and now it's your fault. It's your fault that the schools aren't ready, despite the fact that I was Minister of Education for the last 9 to 10 years, but somehow it's no longer my responsibility. In the last 4 months, you were supposed to fix everything. Meanwhile, you complain about the previous guy for the last 9 to 10 years, and we're not necessarily seeing a lot of things to really do anything creatively different. We just, in some cases, see more of the same. All right. I think Mr. Digicel had one more point, so I'll close the show with that. The whole situation with this grandparents bill, I'll just use that, right? Short time, I'm not going back to look. And the issue about voter padding. And the caller said it didn't seem necessarily clear what the opposition's point was. Now, that could be for two reasons. One, they themselves don't fully understand the situation, which I believe to be the case potentially more often than we would like to admit. There have been times, especially when certain politicians speak about things like digitization and new technologies and other buzzwords that are like new concepts or whatever field they're in, right? Colin maybe is the one that comes to mind, but there have been others. But whenever he talked about digitization, I felt as though somebody wrote a speech and he read words he didn't potentially understand or fully grasp. Now, in that sense, I could kind of understand that, because some of these buzzwords are kind of industry foolishness, really. And that's not his industry. That's not even his portfolio. He's an engineer who's Minister of Finance. Technically, his job is not about digitization. So to some extent, you could kind of give it a little bit of a pass, even though really and truly he's supposed to have the capacity to internalize new information that's relevant to his ministry in order to show proper leadership and understanding of the work that he's doing. But the whole Auditor General situation comes back to the fact that it seems as though he didn't understand what the concept of an audit was, much less a national level audit, as Minister of Finance. And that's just one example. You could maybe look at Reginald Moore not potentially understanding his role as AG, or Faris Sawari for that matter. You know, you could look at Rohan Sinana and potentially not understanding about the responsibilities on the ferry service in the first 6 months of their administration, and so on and so on. You could potentially look at the claims or the report that Foster Cummings, companies associated to him and his family, got $100 million, $102 million apparently, over the 10 years of the PNM administration. Seems like the PNM really didn't understand the term conflict of interest. That is just but one example. A term that should be one of the major things that they should be watching for and guarding against, because it could impact how the public perceives them. But I guess in politics, public perception being negative is not that big of a deal in TNT, apparently. And of course, there's whole situations. You could find examples for the UNC as well, right? The Prime Minister potentially not being in Port of Spain, but seemingly, and can she physically handle the commute on a regular basis, because Parliament is in Port of Spain. Now, maybe she was staying in her home in Siparia while Parliament was on recess, maybe. But one more thing, the reason why the diplomatic center is in Port of Spain, the Prime Minister's residence is in Port of Spain, Parliament is in Port of Spain, all of government ministries are in Port of Spain, the office of the Prime Minister is in Port of Spain. If you want to decentralize government, that's fine. But until that happens, your job is mostly in Port of Spain. You're not there to take a shovel, and dig out the drains yourself. You're there to oversee things from the very top, and the CEO's chair is in Port of Spain. And if you're not in Port of Spain, So I do wonder if a lot of these politicians fully understand the job that they're doing. Here's the other thing. Sometimes in ideological debates, political arguments, or whatever, I suspect what at least our politicians do is they don't always spell it out in simple terms for the layman to understand. Because maybe they don't want to spell it out. Maybe they want to leave it open to your interpretation. Because you ever notice the more successful movies where there's a monster? Take Jaws, for example. Critically acclaimed, so we ain't going into some B-movie nonsense. You didn't see much of the shark. You saw things from the shark's perspectives. You saw the fear in the victim's eyes. But it was left to the viewer's imagination to come up with the terror. It is left to the public to come up with what they think is the argument based on what is said on a limited basis. And by doing so, you craft their argument for them. They're not trying to spell it out and explain it to you fully so that you are left now to try to connect the dots yourself to what you think is a reasonable argument there in the weeds, thereby doing their work for them. It's a theory that I have. It's a theory that I have. I don't know how true it is. But if true, what it allows them to do is, if their position is weak, they can kind of cover that up because you will interpret what might not be actually the situation. You will interpret it in a more positive way for them. And you can't say that they spun the narrative. And it limits what they say. So it limits the amount of mistakes they could make if they leave it in your hands to figure it out. That's what I think happens in politics, at times anyway. But who knows, right? All I know is I really hope we could figure out this flooding thing because it really bothers me. It's not as much as the Paria tragedy, how that bothered me. It's not as bad as how certain murders, particularly of children, bother me. But it's more like that long-term ache that's just wearing down on your soul, right? That dull pain that's keeping you up at night and giving you stress. It's not a sharp pain that's debilitating, but it's debilitating in the sense of it's not going away, and it's wearing down your resolve, and it's wearing out your tolerance. To me, flooding is one of those issues, because it affects so many people, and it could do so much damage to people's quality of life. And are they not our fellow citizens? And of course, for those of us who have not had their home flooded out in recent years, there was a time when my yard was flooded, there was a time when my street was flooded. Let's not say it hasn't happened to us yet, so we don't have to stick our neck out to speak out about the issue. No. If you are not prepared, then you better be prepared to fail. We should not be only willing to speak about issues when it directly affects us. If it affects people of this country, as citizens of this country, who, in theory, we are supposed to engage in the running of this country, because to some extent, that's what it means to be in a democracy. It's not to put your head in the sign and point at somebody and say, you fix it. Yes, we will appoint people with the specific powers and responsibilities as necessary for practical function. But to some extent or another, all able-bodied citizens should be involved in their country's day-to-day operations, in whatever is practical and responsible in the capacity of their position. Since most of us don't have a government position, we don't have a great capacity, but that doesn't mean we have zero capacity. What could be done to the least of us can be done to the rest of us. On that note, stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Never forget, it's nice to be nice. Hopefully, we'll see each other tomorrow, all of us. Sean Michael Small, this is Tori Moyne on WESN. Until tomorrow, bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services,